the redeemed of the Lord, let the redeemed of the Lord say so, because the world needs to know. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, because the world needs to know. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so.
Greetings and welcome to Say So, where we talk about it, whatever it is, because what you do not know can hurt you. So let's get to the root. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Letitia R. Stuckey. And for today's episode of Say So, we will continue part 2 of non-death related grief and loss. We're gonna pick up with talking about disenfranchised grief. And the reason for my interest in this topic is because typically when you think of grief and loss, you automatically think of death or losing a loved one or someone that you know or used to have in your life. Of death or losing a loved one or someone that you know or used to have in your life. And in episode 1 through 4, I briefly mentioned how children like myself who have experienced separation from their parents, being under Child Protective Services, experience grief and loss on some level, whether it's grieving the loss of being placed in different placements from their biological siblings, not having their parents, having to leave their house or their neighborhood or their apartment, having to leave toys behind, or their apartment, having to leave toys behind, having to leave clothes behind, and just different possessions that may have had sentimental value, just to name a few of the ways that children experience grief and loss, having to change schools or daycares, things of that nature. I'm going to go over the definition of disenfranchised grief once again. And it's important to know that Ken Doka, about 20 years ago, actually coined the phrase disenfranchised grief. And basically, it means grief that persons experience when they incur a loss that is not or cannot be openly acknowledged, socially sanctioned, or publicly mourned. So that's also known as hidden grief or sorrow, and it goes unacknowledged or unvalidated by social. That this grief and loss fall into one of these 4 categories. The first one is that it's seen as unworthy. For an example, it's a non-death loss. The second reason is the relationship is stigmatized. So an example of that would be that the partner is in an extramarital affair. So it's not something that is, socially sanctioned that individuals may agree with. The third reason is the mechanism of death is stigmatized, given our suicide or overdose, which causes the death. The fourth reason is the person not recognized as a griever. For example, if it's your coworker or your ex-partner, because they're exes, or you may work with them or may not work with them anymore. Individuals around you may feel like, well, why are you grieving, or why are you taking this so hard? And the fifth reason is the way someone's grieving is stigmatized. For example, is the absence of an outward display of grief, or their response is extreme, seem over the top. Now, I was able to gather some information from a blog group, and the name of it is What's Your Grief? Or for short, YWG. And they asked their community, which is the individuals that follow the blog or read, and they were able to come up collectively with 64 examples of disenfranchised grief and loss. And as I read these, I want you to look at your own personal life and see how many of the 64 that you have experienced and self-evaluate whether you have fully or completely taken the time or an opportunity to grieve this loss or those losses. So the first of the 64 that are listed is a death by suicide. The second is a death by drug overdose. The third is death of a pet. So once again, these are disenfranchised grief, which people may not validate your feelings of grief and loss, and they may not acknowledge it, and it may not be socially sanctioned or socially to grieve these things. The fourth is infertility. The fifth is loss of a home. And the sixth is grieving someone that you didn't know very well. The seventh is grieving someone you don't know at all, like a celebrity. And going back to number 6, for example, it could be if you're estranged from your parent, and say that you find your parent and maybe you guys are working towards your relationship or working on that that parental and child relationship, then you may not know them as mother and father, or as the typical occupying the typical role of a mother and a father or a parental child relationship, but you may grieve on a different level because your dreams, your hopes, your fantasies about having that level of support from them is now gone. It's not an option anymore because they've passed on or transitioned. So that could be an example of grieving someone you don't really know very well, but maybe someone that you're trying to get to know. Number 8 is grieving someone you only knew online. So a cyber loss. So it could be somebody like a Facebook loss. So it could be somebody like a Facebook friend, or somebody, that you follow on Twitter or follow on Instagram, or that you guys are connected in some way, shape, or form there. And once again, they term it as a cyber loss because you only know them online. You've never met them in person. Number 9 from the list of disenfranchised grief is the death of a sibling. Number 10 is grief that people think has gone on too long. And there is honestly no blueprint or no manual on how long you should grieve any loss. But so people feel that, it's been 6 months or it's been a year since your husband died or you've been widowed. It's time for you to get up and get back out there and date. And, for different individuals, it takes a longer amount of time. I've actually heard that even in the situation where there is separation and or divorce, I've heard it said years to kind of grieve and kind of get it out of your system or detox yourself from the loss of your spouse. And I've even heard it termed as the death of a marriage. So of course, grief and loss have to do with death. And I've heard that it takes an equivalent amount of time, or it could, for some individuals, take an equivalent amount of time for you to mourn or grieve that loss in totality. So for example, if you were married for 8 years, it may take, if what I've heard is accurate, it may take you up to 8 years to fully grieve that loss. And so that's the one about people feeling like, it's taken too long and you should be past this and you should be over this by now. And the 11th one is loss of someone elderly. Number 12 is death by homicide. And so the number 13 is a death from HIV or AIDS. And because there's a stigma related to that, some individuals may feel that it is, it shouldn't be publicly if the individual, let's say if it was a homosexual male and he acquired HIV or AIDS because of the type of sex that, he had with other males, then some individuals may feel that, that you shouldn't mourn them, or, that you shouldn't mourn them, or, whatever decisions they made were the cause of them contracting HIV or AIDS, and vice versa. It happens to heterosexual individuals as well, females and or males. So just basically the stigma attached to the condition or the actual cause of death. Once again, like, for example, number 1 was suicide and number 2 was a drug overdose. So depending on the way the individual transitioned, or what caused it or contributed to their transitioning or their death, people may feel, okay, so why are you mourning? Them? They committed suicide. They killed themselves. They decided they didn't want to live anymore. So why, are you mourning them? They pretty much got what they wanted, or, may have that sort of mindset. Number 14 is getting clean and the loss of a drug or been addicted to. So, typically when someone is addicted to something, a substance, a drug, or something of that nature, it fills a void, or it causes them to not feel, or it numbs them from a reality of something that has happened to them, traumatized them, something they've seen or experienced, them not to experience it fully because they're high, or, they're able to kind of escape until they come down from that high. So if you, once you get clean, then you're going to have to deal with whatever it was that you wanted to stay high and stay away from, or, not remember, or try to suppress. So, that's one thing that we typically don't think of, but that you have to grieve the loss of that drug that used to keep you from worrying about the bills or worrying about what happened to you as a child. Number 15 is death of the partner in an extramarital affair, which was previously mentioned, and it's pretty much individuals may feel like, okay, well, you were committing adultery, so why are you grieving that loss? What you did was wrong. Some people may feel, so you don't have a right to grieve the loss of that person because they were married to someone else, or, your relationship was not healthy or moral. Number 16 is loss of a job. Number 17 is divorce, and I have definitely experienced divorce. 18 is moving or loss of community, and I'm pretty sure most of you individuals have moved from one place to another. So there is a loss of community when you move, because like I said previously, with individuals who are in the system or who are placed outside of the home or in a group home, or just have community, even if it's a poverty-stricken community or it's not the best or most healthy community, that's what they've known. And, that's their environment that they're used to or have grown used to or have had to adapt to. Number 19 is grieving someone you can't remember. For an example, they say, I've experienced this in a different way. It wasn't a parent that died when I was an infant. I have had an older sister named Shakita that passed away. She and I would have been approximately a year apart, and she passed away. Passed away at 4 months and 3 days old. I never got to meet her, but she and I both had the same mother and father. So I actually dedicated my first book to her. And the book is entitled Cast Down But Not Destroyed, Destiny's Child. And that's just because I, grieve that I won't have a big sister. I have an older brother, but I won't have a big sister because I'm actually a big sister. I'm the third born. So I've experienced that as well. Grieving someone, number 20, is grieving someone who died before you were born. Oh, I did that. Is grieving someone who died before you were born. Oh, I did that. Oh, no. Actually, this says an older sibling who died before you were born. So I guess I would fit into number 20 as opposed to 19 because it was not a parent that passed away. It was an older sibling. Number 21 is dying from childbirth. And that makes me think of the song years ago that Aaron Hall used to sing. And it was called I Miss You. And in the video, basically what happened was his girlfriend, or I think it was his fiance or wife, actually. I believe she may have had a ring. And she passed away while giving birth to their child. That's just an example. Number 22 is death of an ex-spouse or an ex-partner. And individuals may feel like, okay, you guys aren't together or weren't together for an extended period of time, so why are you taking this so hard? Or if you I guess love that person or wanted to be with them, you weren't. So they're an ex for a reason, I guess. Number 23 is death of a same-sex partner. And once again, there's just a stigma attached to same-sex partner relationships. So society or individuals may feel that, why are you mourning them? They were just, basically the basis or the foundation of your relationship is unhealthy, once again, or immoral. So you don't have the right to mourn or grieve that loss. Number 24 is a miscarriage or stillborn. And for whatever reason, you're not anymore, or you have the child and they are not alive when they're born, or they pass immediately following, and you go to the hospital expecting to bring a child home and have it packed in their first outfits and all of the Johnson & Johnson products or whatever is necessary, and then you have to come home from the hospital by yourself. And with all of these things, you may already have the nursery waiting and ready and things of that nature. So that's definitely a grief and a loss. And some individuals may feel like, okay, well, they may give you a small amount of time to get over that. But, that's also death of the dreams that you had of being a mother or a father, of seeing them married or graduate or go to school or walk or talk, run, just all of the milestones. That's also a death of that as well. Number 25 is estrangement from family. And that's, once again, if you're in the system, be under Child Protective Services, or you're being adopted or something like that, there is an estrangement or detachment from your family for whatever reason. Number 26 is loss of meaningful objects or belongings. Once again, for whatever reason, and it's a crisis or sudden situation, if you're being taken from your parents, then you don't get to pack. You don't get days to pack like if it was a traditional move. You pretty much have to get what you can or what may be able to fit in a suitcase or a bag, and the rest has to be left. Number 27 would be not showing enough emotion while grieving. So for example, some individuals experience grief and loss differently, and they may become numb. So they may not cry, they may not look sad or outwardly have a display of their grief and loss. They may internalize what we would consider inappropriate outbursts. Like they may laugh. Some people, when they're put on the spot or they're embarrassed or something of that nature, they laugh. It's kind of a nervous laughter or whatever. But I would imagine maybe some individuals that aren't comfortable aren't familiar with experiencing grief or loss or death, of some sort, that they may, do things that seem inappropriate because it's new for them. Number 28 is showing too much emotion while grieving. So for example, just being over the top and almost as if you're acting or something, because you're just super emotional, you're super expressive, you're super loud, and just claiming lots of attention because of the way that you're grieving. Number 27 is loss of language, culture, or tradition. And I would have to think, that makes me think of like slavery. As African Americans, we were stripped of our language. We were stripped of our culture and our traditions. We came over to America. Those things weren't continued or nurtured or accepted over here. So number 30 is loss of hopes and dreams for the future. And once again, that I kind of went over that with the stillborn or a miscarriage, with the a marriage, with being separated from your parents. There's lots of ways that you can experience loss of hopes and dreams for the future. Number 31 is grief following an abortion. And that's like, once again, a taboo subject, stigmatized. Individuals may feel like that, you had the abortion. Why would you grieve that? Because you initiated the procedure or allowed it to happen or consented to it. So why would you grieve that? And any loss, is a loss. Any form of grief or any way that is needed or necessary to grieve is grief. So I don't think that we should priority, or you should not grieve that or whatever. Give people permission and the space to grieve whatever their loss is in whatever way they deem necessary. Number 32 is grief following adoption. And time is kind of fleeting, so I'm going to just go ahead through the list, or there may be a part 3 to this, because if an example comes up for me, I don't want to miss the opportunity to explain or further delve into explaining the different types of disenfranchised grief. So number 32, grief following adoption. Once again, that's pretty self-explanatory, and we've talked about all the things that children grieve and lose when they're separated from their family for whatever reason. They may be adopted because they're orphans now because their parents are, no longer with us or deceased or have transitioned. But following the adoption, that could also coincide with the earlier example of infertility. So if you are adopting as a result of infertility, that may be bittersweet emotionally or to accept. Number 33 is learning a secret, finding out a person wasn't who you thought they were. So if you were a person wasn't who you thought they were. So if you were raised to think that someone was your parent and they're actually not, because your parent may have had you at a young age and they weren't mature enough to take care of you, or whatever the situation or circumstance is, believing that your grandmother is your mother, your mother. So that's just an example. 34 is grieving someone who is still living. And the example they give is 34 through 41. So we're going to get to some of those. Number 35 is grieving a loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia, and the one with Alzheimer's or dementia. And that grief, is a different or unique type of grief because the person is maybe still here physically, their body's still here. They haven't transitioned, but their thoughts are not as strong as they used to be, or their memories. They may not even know who you are. So you're grieving that you are her child, and may think you're your staff at the retirement home or something of that nature. So number 36 is grieving a loved one with a substance use disorder. And I have experienced this on some level because my biological mom had a substance abuse addiction. She was actually in addiction, to use her words, for over 21 years. Well, she said 21 plus years. So just grieving that, as even though I was an adult, it may have been a teenager or something, but I remember it most distinctly as an adult. But you grieve that loss because that parent who, and for me, my mom wasn't there basically in the beginning. My aunt raised me starting at age 4 until I got married at 20. But even as an adult, married and starting your own life with your mom, still not having that mother-daughter relationship that you may have thought would have eventually evolved because now she has a substance abuse disorder that she's, dealing with, struggling with, or whatever. So she's not present or able to be the mother, that she has been called to be. Number 37, grieving someone who has experienced a traumatic brain injury. Because traumatic brain injuries, I've heard that can literally change your personality, like make a gentle man or gentle woman aggressive and, want to fight and abusive even. So that's definitely something to grieve. Person was one way and then they sustained this injury. And now going forward, they're different. Their personality is different. Their demeanor is different. Their countenance is different. That's definitely something I could see that would be a grief and a loss. Grieving someone who is dealing with severe mental illness. Same difference, or a very similar circumstance who they were prior to that. And a lot of times diagnoses, it's triggered around 20s or 30s, or depending on the stressors in their life. Some, like like schizophrenia is typically triggered while somebody is in college, because there's a lot of stress and a lot of demands and exams and just different things that you have to, as a student, as a college student, lots of responsibility and obligation that you have. So some individuals, that sustained stress causes something to trigger, and mentally they're not the same anymore. Mentally, with schizophrenia, two of the main symptoms are hallucinations. And so hallucination basically means that you're things that are not there. Delusions. So you're also hearing things that are not there, or that no one else can hear, or that's definitely a loss as well. And depending on who the individual is. So for example, what if it's your parent, your mother or father? So now you have to, the expectations that you may have had that they would be present mentally as well as physically may not be a reality anymore because of their mental decline that they've experienced with their mind and the way that it works now. Number one is grieving someone who has run away. And if you're in a situation where your family situation is not the most stable or is dysfunctional in some way, shape, or form, you may have a sibling that runs away from home. And typically when individuals run away, there's some sort of abuse. There's that makes them not want to, stay there for whatever reason. Or they could just not want to adhere to whatever the rules of the house are. So there are definitely different reasons for individuals running away and wanting to escape their situation or their home life. Number 40 is grieving someone who has disappeared. And this makes me think, if somebody that you know and love is abducted, and, just the uncertainty of not knowing where they are, if they're eating or sleeping, if they're alive, if they're thinking about you, or if they were, that is a lot to consider as it pertains to the grieving process. And I'm going to do 41, and then there'll be a part 3. So 41 is grieving someone who is incarcerated, which is a different level of grief because once again, they haven't transitioned. You typically aren't able to see them as often as you used to before they were incarcerated. If they're even allowed visitation, sometimes, if the inmates do not behave themselves, visitation is taken, or they're stripped of that privilege. If they get into fights or whatever, there's just different reasons. And even when you're doing visitation, sometimes the level of to touch them, you may be talking to them through plexiglass or something like that. There may be no physical contact that you're able to have. You may not be able to hug them or anything of that nature. So there's definitely grief associated with that, because if they were not incarcerated, then that would be an option for you to be able to give them a hug or a kiss, or, talk to them face to face or whatever. Once again, we just went over numbers 1 of 41 of the list of disenfranchised grief. And these are examples of non-death related forms of grief. And being said, I want you to remember that God has the final say so about where you have been, where you are now, and where you are going. You are simply in the process of becoming. Until next time, miracles and blessings. Until next time, miracles and blessings to you today and every day.
The redeemed of the Lord say so, because the